Oh, welcome to another exciting live edition of the School Safety News Podcast. I'm Amanda Klinger.
And I'm Dr. Amy Klinger.
And we are with the Educators School Safety Network. I think maybe we might start again just real quick because I forgot to record on the audio side. As per usual, we're working out the kinks with this live podcasting thing. But we're going to start today with the School Safety News Podcast talking about an article that I came across in Campus Safety Magazine, which I think I sent to you, but I don't know if you had a chance to look at it yet. And I tweeted about this earlier this week. And it is two individuals who work for the State Department of Education in Idaho. And they work doing assessments of campuses and of school campuses. And they have some concerns saying that the misalignment of protection technology abilities with the operational reality of running a campus can turn the use of security equipment into security theater. And when I read that,
There's a new word for
hooked.
us, but yeah.
I was hooked. And that is really aligned with concerns that we often have. Not that
I think pretty much we have beat that drum almost every podcast.
And it's not that technology solutions are bad or that tools that can help keep our schools safe are bad. The concern that we always have, and what was echoed in this piece, which was why I was so thrilled, was that a tool alone can't make our schools safer. And so they talk about when they do security assessments, they encounter schools that have had a significant investment in a particular technological solution, which we also see in our work a lot. And you read about it all the time of schools that are spending big bucks on different types of technological solutions. But they see no improvement in the security profile. They say they have an unhappy conversation with the school. And despite the dollars spent, the school is no safer than it was before the purchase.
And I think that's really the big takeaway there is I don't think anyone would have a problem with spending money on equipment and security related things if we saw an outcome that made a difference. And I think that's really a big.
Yeah. And they acknowledge in here that, they say school boards and administrators are under intense pressure to improve school safety, which, as we all know, is very much the case. And they said that this unrelenting pressure to do something can skew decisions toward a showroom full of technology-driven solutions, which I feel like is something that, that we say all the time.
We could fill up the School Safety News podcast with just discussions like that of districts that are buying this and buying that and buying this, and the parents are upset. Same thing.
Yeah. And here's the takeaway. So they talk about the sort of the same types of technology that they typically see, which I don't think we need to belabor here, but sort of their big takeaway at the end. Technology has a place in school safety and security when it is supported by solid operations, trained staff, institutional commitment, and a clear understanding of the technology's limitations. Technology can make us safer. Without these elements, solid operations, trained staff, institutional commitment, and understanding of its limitation. Without those things, security technology is often nothing more than a very expensive, worthless gesture. So that was written by...
And I think you could actually even stretch that a bit. Not only that, but I'll go a little bit further. In many ways, it imparts this false sense of security. It makes us less safe. It makes a school less safe to have an over-reliance on an expensive piece of equipment that says, well, we have this one thing, so therefore we don't have to do anything else and we don't have to be concerned about anything else. So I think their point is a great one, but I'll go that step further. Not only is it doesn't make a difference, I would say in many cases it can make it less safe.
It can have the impact of making us less safe. Now, I had a discussion with someone on Twitter that was talking about that, that doing those other parts, changing our operations, having training, doing the other things. And because my sort of takeaway when I tweeted out this article was that the technology tools aren't a problem. They're not bad, but we need to get our house in order. We need to have good policies. We need to have operational procedures that make sense. We need to be aware of the risks that our school faces. And then we have to have trained and empowered our folks to be able to do the work of school safety. And unless we have our house in order in that regard, that the spending money on technology stuff is, I think, really problematic. And this person said that they were concerned that it was too high of a bar of entry, that schools need to be doing something. And so spending money on access control is doing something. And I would postulate that operational side of it is not that expensive. The example that we were discussing on Twitter was access control. yeah, you can spend big bucks. You can spend $30K on an access control thing. But if your house is not in order, if we haven't talked with folks of why are we concerned about people having unfettered access to this school, if we haven't talked about and created the operational expectation that you will engage with visitors that you see here, if we haven't done the people side of access control, then spending $30,000, you are truly wasting $30,000. Now, are there schools that have changed their policies and procedures and they're aware of access control and there is the expectation that everyone will engage with visitors so that we have that sort of operational, the house in order, and then maybe we want to spend some money on some technology, then that makes sense. But typically, we're seeing sort of the quick fix solution.
Well, and I think that buzzer game really resonates with people. I hear that a great deal in the work that we do of people saying, we have a buzzer, you press it, I press it, you walk in, we're no different other than you got to press a buzzer and I got to press a buzzer.
Is that what
and
you guys
that
see?
Really resonates with
And
folks.
I would ask, is that what you see, in the schools that you work in or the schools where your kids go to? Do you see that sort of that buzzer, which is something that's well-intentioned as access control?
And interestingly enough, it seems to resonate equally with the parents outside on that side of the buzzer who say, what's the point of this? If I just buzz and you just let me in. And then the educators on the other side of the buzzer saying the same thing. So it's really one of those few sort of misfires that everyone kind of agrees this isn't working. We understand what we were trying to do to begin with, but we all agreed that this is not what we thought we were doing when we started down this road. So.
Right. And I think, I feel like sometimes it might seem like we're bashing these technology tools. I think we talked quite a bit in one episode about apps that are that are managing, how students, making threats and tips and managing that. And, the concern that we have is that these technology, there absolutely is a way that technology can enhance the work that we're doing. I'm a very technologically driven person, but we cannot get to the point where we are outsourcing, for example, the emotional labor of a student who might be in crisis. We can't outsource that emotional labor to an app. Even if, the artificial intelligence is good enough that it would be helpful and impactful, there's a cost. There's a cost to kids when we are, doing some of these, if this big expenditures that they talk about in this article are access control, video surveillance, visitor management, and apps, there's a cost to students. When what we do is visitor engagement, which is that people are engaging with visitors versus we have a buzzer and a this and facial recognition software and all these other things. I think that there's a cost to kids. And I think, you bring up the point of how impactful or effective even are those things. I think that we're going to look back on this time frame in the work that we've been doing and wonder what was the impact on our kids and the impact on learning.
Yep.
So
I think so too.
Anything else you want to say about that?
No.
Since this is a live stream, in case you can hear, I don't even know what kind of noise in the background. Someone here in the house is sneezing like their face off. So I think he's okay.
It's cold and flu season.
Apparently. Yeah. School safety tip: cough into your arm, wash your hands very often, use antimicrobial soap
while you wash it. So anyways, whatever.
So
the wonders of live, whatever.
Yeah. Anything else you want to add to that one? I would ask our listeners and our viewers, like, is that consistent with what you see? And I think part of the reason that this happens is because there is a lot of marketing pressure. I think, administrators are under a lot of marketing pressure from people who are selling these things. But I think also that some of it is that when you have parents demanding that we do something about school safety.
And what can you show? You can say, well, we had a really good 2-hour conversation and a really meaningful tabletop.
And we're really going to,
and there's nothing to show.
We're going to change our procedures and, we really feel more prepared. Yeah. I mean, that's difficult. So some of it is that we need to, people who are interfacing with schools, maybe not working at schools, need to shift the way that we're thinking and what we're asking, of the schools where we send our kids. Yeah. So I guess I would ask folks if that's consistent, with the experiences that you've had or, sort of what you've seen in your schools and the schools that you work in and what people have done successfully and sort of if that resonates with your experience as well. So
I think we would be remiss in this particular episode if we didn't spend, and I don't want to spend more than literally seconds, but I think we have to, if we're really looking at school safety news, clearly there's been a lot of news. and a lot of discussion in regards to the situation with the students in Kentucky, in Covington, Kentucky. And
from Kentucky.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And they've had to close school, a number of different things, and without in any way having any political conversation. I think what we would be remiss if we didn't just point out, I don't care where you are on the spectrum of politics and divisiveness and who you like or don't like and who you hate or don't hate. There is no point where making death threats and advocating violence against kids, regardless of where you are, is acceptable. And so I think that's what we really need to sort of acknowledge, that the school has found themselves in just a horrific position of trying to protect students and all of the threats that have come about. There's an awful lot of threats that come up, and a lot of threats that schools are dealing with. And so I think we have to take a step back and sort of look at, wow, what is the cost to our kids, regardless of who these kids are and what state they're from and what school? We could fill up this podcast with threats after threats after threats, whether it's
unrelated to anything political.
that have nothing to do with politics or not. But we as a society have to be able to take a step back and sort of go, regardless of what the motivation is, are we really at the point where we are threatening violence against kids? And I could, we could pull up 10 stories of, a disgruntled parent that's going to blow up the school, and a former employee who's upset, and they say they're going to lock the doors and burn the kids inside. All these kind of things that, we can't make the excuse of it being politics, because it's not just politics. Unfortunately, we have lots of schools that are dealing with just really horrific threats for that we have to sort of take a step back and go, really, is this where we are?
I don't think anyone who's like reasonably having the discussion about what happened is, I don't think reasonable people who are having reasonable discussions about these, I don't think those are the folks making death threats. So I don't think that we're really adding much to the conversation by pointing out to our listeners, like,
I just think
death threats against kids. Like, clearly, I don't think.
But I'm just saying this is a very hot topic right now, and I think that we would be remiss if we didn't just say, forget. We don't want to talk about the politics of it. We just want to keep circling back to the idea of, we're looking at schools with a really tall order and a really difficult job to try to keep kids safe from the threats and the vulnerabilities that are out there. Let's not make it more difficult.
Sure. Okay. So
one of the ones that I wanted to talk about very quickly was one in particular that I think sort of typifies this dilemma between age of kids and at what point do we hold them accountable for behaviors, and yet how do we ensure that kids are safe? And so this is a 5th grade student where they're filing.
And this is in Wisconsin, right? We're moving on to a different
topic. This is a 5th grade student that is filing charges about sexual harassment. And when you go on and sort of look at this has been an ongoing issue where a student wrote the words "die" many times in the snow on the playground, and supposedly was not appropriately disciplined. And the student was called vulgar names, was threatened, had death threats at least several different times. At the first one, the administration brought the 2 kids together to work it out, which is maybe not always the best choice, but in this particular case, another student made sexually suggestive comments. These are, again, our 5th graders, and threatened to rape another student. And then they continually went on to work with students who were making poor choices. And, that verbiage, some of the things that they are talking about are not just poor choices, they're threats.
Right.
And so it's really kind of interesting and sort of sad, I guess, that we are working with 5th grade students who are using ridiculously vulgar, emotionally and sexually charged language that we don't know if they even know what they're saying, but they're using those sort of words. And I guess probably one of the students went on to win a PBIS award, a behavior award from the school. And so you can kind of see this sort of collision between the age of the student, the parent of the student that is being harassed, just wanting it to stop, the age of the students engaging in these behaviors, and what do you as an administration or as a school do? How do we balance the need for discipline with the need for intervention and appropriate supports? And so it really sort of typifies that. And I think we often think of this sort of the description of what I just talked about, the death threats, the sexualized language, the threat, threats of sexual violence, all that kind of stuff. We have this assumption that that's a secondary problem. And so I think it's really important for us to understand that as educators in general, we need to be tuned into what's being said, what kind of verbiage is being used, and how are kids talking to each other, and not just dismiss it as, well, they're just little kids, they don't really even know what they're saying. They're still saying it. And it still
I think that's really
requires a response.
I think it speaks to the really difficult balance that schools have to strike, because we know that we have a problem in this country with the schools of prison pipeline, and we know that we have a problem with inequitable distribution of discipline to students, but yet. So we can't just say, well, we're not, but we also can't say we're not going to discipline students. I mean, we have to be able to strike some middle point where there are consequences, and we are able to say, you know what, this is language that's unacceptable, or these are actions, heading towards violence or bordering on violence that are unacceptable. But we also can't just be suspending and expelling kids because we know that there's a cost for kids being separated from school. So
it shouldn't take litigation. Well, but it shouldn't take litigation to get that conversation going, or to create that sort of a acknowledgement on the part of a school. I mean, and that's, I think, and we need to see both sides of that. But as a parent, we can understand, going back to what you said, why earlier, why parents are standing at board meetings saying, do something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. We have one of our listeners talking that, they think that there should be more funding for schools so that they can have more behavioral specialists and mental health officials in schools. And that you need that side of the supports and the people with that really specific expertise, in behavior, in mental health, in counseling, to be able to do that. And I think you're actually absolutely right. And I think part of it is, if we don't have a structure or a plan in place of how are we going to deal with a discipline concern that is maybe a concern about violence, about school violence as well, if we're just winging it, we're not going to be able to find that balance. Yeah. If we're just, I sort of make a decision, and then these parents are super upset, and then I kind of change my decision, and then these parents are super, if we don't have a plan for this is the way that we handle it, then we might have a problem with implicit bias, or we might have a problem that we're overreacting or underreacting or whatever. And I think the takeaway for this, which is the takeaway for a lot of the safety concerns that we have, is we can't wing it. We have to have a plan ahead of time to be able to do some of this really difficult work.
But you have to also acknowledge the fact that you have people who are being asked to do things that are so far outside the depth of what their training may have been. As an administrator or as a classroom teacher, you don't have extensive training in mental health or in social work or in, as a medical professional or a mental health professional. And so I think a lot of this really comes back to that same sort of training, is if people will rise to the level of the training that you have given them. And if you don't like what people are doing, it's because you're not training them. So if you don't like the response that you're getting as parents or whoever it is, you don't like the response of your administration or your school nurse or whoever it is, that may very well be a training issue, not necessarily an issue of them deliberately trying to do something, that's incorrect.
Yeah.
And I sort of think it's interesting that this kind of coincides with a lot of the discussion, and I'm not super up on it, but a lot of the discussion through the LA teacher strike about the school nurse, the idea of that, school nurses should not be this sort of occasional, they can drop in, but they need to have access to mental health. They need to have access to school nurses, because you're giving teachers the same tools that we gave teachers in 1890. Right. And then we're saying, this
plus iPads.
And some of the technology may feel like it's 1890, but you're giving teachers the same tools that you gave them 100 years ago and expect them to solve problems that weren't even in anyone's head in 20 years ago,
Right.
let alone 100 years ago. And I think that's really where we see a lot of these breakdowns, of some of these situations that make their way into the media are really indicative of that sort of breakdown.
Absolutely.
So, okay, my last one today comes from another set of middle school kids. And these are two middle school students that were charged based on a thwarted plot. And we talk a lot about thwarted plots, but this one in particular, the students were...
Just sort of quickly define what a thwarted plot. So we have thwarted plot, which is someone who had a pretty detailed plan of violence, to commit violence at school or to commit violence against a classmate, that is thwarted so that they would have been attempting to carry it out. Who knows how successful or whatever, but they would have attempted to carry it out, but for some sort of an intervention, which typically we find is someone else saying, oh, wait, you're serious about this? Holy cow, and telling an adult. So
in this particular case, this one's unusual in that it's it's girls, and there's two of them. Again, usually we have a lone individual. So this is a 12-year-old girl and an 11-year-old girl who had spent the weekend watching scary movies and decided that they were going to kill other students and eat them. And so they brought a variety of knives.
Did we talk about this already, or was there something comparable to this earlier in the year?
They brought, I think, 6 or 7 different knives or sort of implements, and they were in their first period class, met in the bathroom, and they were hanging out in the bathroom waiting for smaller students to come into the bathroom so that they could attack them. They had a notion that they were going to kill at least 15 people. And they knew that they needed to target younger kids so that they could overpower them. They were going to stab them, cut their throats, and then pile the bodies up in a stall. They researched online where they needed to stab someone so that they would bleed out the most. And then it devolves into this whole idea that they were Satan worshipers and they had brought a goblet to drink the blood and all this other stuff, which, again, it's very difficult to even imagine how those sort of things. But it was interesting that they had somebody had heard a discussion about it.
Yeah, so that's my question. So how was this plot thwarted?
It was thwarted because someone had said that they had heard something about it. So they were sort of in tune to it, but it really came about.
An adult overheard it?
No, a kid. And then they told the SRO. So they were sort of in tune to it, but it really came about because the school called because the kid wasn't in class. The kid was not, the two girls didn't show up at their second period class. So they called thinking they were out of school. And the mother said, no, my daughter is at school. They started looking for her, and that's how they found him. So I mean, again, these, are clearly these outliers. Mm-hmm. But I guess sometimes the point in sort of talking about these is that we have this notion of, that would never happen with these young, and unfortunately, it clearly does. Yeah. So I'll tie that to my last one, which is a very quick one.
But that one was your last one.
Yeah, I know, but I'm tying it together because this one, I think, is a great example of where a kid got a threatening text, or I'm sorry, something on their phone, either a text or a phone message, a threatening one. They told a parent who called the school, and within 30 minutes, they had made the decision that it was a legitimate concern, canceled school. The police arrested the kid on his way to the school. It was from another area, but he was coming there. And so again, the point was, and this is the point they make in the article, is it works when people divulge and disclose something without going, he was probably kidding. Maybe he didn't mean it. Right. Somebody just, it doesn't sound like it was hysterical. It didn't sound like it was any marching in the streets or whatever. It was, here's what happened. They tell a parent, the parent tells the school responds appropriately. Law enforcement gets involved. And in very short order, we have contained that situation without huge cost to kids in terms of the trauma and in terms of, instructionally, we lost a day because they canceled. But I would say there is also a big takeaway and a lesson here that would help to make this school safer. You told us, we responded, we took care of this situation. And so it works when we have our ducks in a row and we respond appropriately. It works.
Yeah. And I think, there's always that discussion of, what's happening online, and I don't know what they meant by this, and were they kidding and were they not? And I think, if we can shift the mindset that when we disclose information about someone who might be planning a violent attack, that maybe there'll be a discipline consequence or a criminal justice consequence, but we're going to provide supports and interventions for people who are on a path to violence and haven't committed a crime. We're going to provide supports and interventions. And if we can shift that focus a little bit, I think people might be more apt to share information that, well, it wasn't an explicit threat, but like, I'm concerned about these kids. Like the girls.
Well, this one wasn't even a kid that was from that school.
Right. But I mean, like those girls, I bet you if you go back and talk to some of their other teachers, I bet you that they were perhaps engaging in other behaviors of concern. And so how can we get people to feel comfortable going, I'm concerned about this kid. And maybe if it's appropriate, we're going to have a discipline consequence or a criminal justice consequence, but we're going to provide supports and interventions for sure. And so maybe they weren't really that high on a path to violence, or they weren't really serious about perpetrating an attack. We still need to provide supports and interventions because they're engaging in behaviors.
Clearly,
of concern.
there's some behaviors of concern there. And I think we can't always dismiss it and go, I have in my head of who this attacker is going to be, and it's going to be a male, and he's going to be 17. And, we have to make sure that we are not falling into the trap of having blinders to all of these other behaviors that are staring us in the face.
Okay, great. So that is the end of this episode of the School Safety News Podcast. Those of you who are joining us on the live stream, if you wait just a couple minutes, we're going to kick off onto the live stream for the school safety free period, which is a different URL. But wherever you found the link to this one, you should be able to find it there, either on Twitter or Facebook or whatever the case may be. Those of us who are joining us on the podcast, you can subscribe to this podcast. You can subscribe to the School Safety Free Period podcast, pretty much wherever you get your podcasts. How many times can you say podcast in a sentence? A lot. Google Play,
Apparently.
iTunes, Stitcher. You can subscribe directly on our website. You can listen to them directly on the website. And the website is www.eschoolsafety.org. And while you're there, you can check out tons of the free resources that we have available. And if there's a piece of news that we missed that you want us to talk about, or questions or concerns or comments, you can always email us, info@eschoolsafety.org, or you can find us on Twitter and Facebook. So until next time, thanks.